Hello. This is Paris Bennett reporting live. This is Ella's pulpit reporting live at Ella's pulpit. This is the suspect of the dirty diaper.
Paris is always seen playing with her little sister, Ella. He's the perfect big brother. Gentle, attentive, making her giggle and dancing around with her. On February 5th, 2007, at 12:30 a.m., Charity Lee received a phone call. Her 13-year-old son, Paris, had assaulted and stabbed her 4-year-old daughter, Ella, 17 times. Ella died. This is not the story you think you know.
So we can take movies of her in Paris.
Here, Ella, Santa Claus brought you a present.
Everyone who covered this case asked, how could he do this? Why did he do this? How could a mother forgive? But no one asked, what happened in the year before? Who did Paris call for 6 minutes after the murder? Where are the two fathers? And what did the psychiatric hospital know, but never tell? This is the story of the patterns everyone missed. To understand what happened on that disturbing night of February, we need to go back. Not to the day of the murder, but to the beginning. To when everything seemed full of hope. Charity Lee was young when she got pregnant in 1993. She was in a relationship, expecting a baby, and hopeful about the future with his boyfriend. But he left as soon as he learned that Charity was pregnant. He just disappeared. On October 10th, 1993, Paris Lee Bennett was born, and Charity was on her own. No marriage, no partner, no father for her son. Just Charity and her baby boy. One day, out of nowhere, he came to visit his son. Paris was just 17 months old. What Charity didn't know was that this visit might be their last. Paris's father had just been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, suffering from terrifying audio and visual hallucinations. He wanted to see his son one final time, before his mind slipped away completely. Paris thinks he never saw his dad, but he did, that day, for the first and last time. For the next 8 years, it was just Charity and Paris. She poured everything into raising him, and by all accounts, Paris was an extraordinary child. Bright, affectionate, well-behaved. Teachers called him gifted. His IQ would later be tested at 141, genius level. As Paris grew older, Charity tried again at love. She wanted to give Paris a stable family. She married Ella's father and felt like she was finally in heaven. Her son had a father, and her life finally felt complete. A year later, on March 5th, 2002, she was blessed with the most precious gift of all, a baby girl, Ella. Ella's father loved her.
Ella's father.
He held her in his arms, swam with her, and always kept her close to his heart. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect father, there were problems. Problems with alcohol. Ella's father's drinking habits got worse. The relationship started falling apart. And then came the incident that ended everything. Charity got a phone call. Ella's father was in the hospital. A state trooper had pulled him over for drunk driving and asked him to step out of the car. He refused. The officer reached into the vehicle to remove him, and Ella's father popped the clutch. He dragged that state trooper 75 feet up an exit ramp. The officer shot him through the leg to stop the vehicle. When Charity heard what happened, exhaled sharply. She made a decision. She was done with love. She would not drag her children through this chaos. She filed for divorce. Once again, Charity was on her own. 2 children, 2 fathers are gone. But she refused to give up. In 2004, she moved back to Texas with Paris and Ella, settling in Abilene with her mother to get the support she needed while rebuilding their lives. Paris finally had a little sister now. From the very first moment, Paris seemed absolutely devoted to her. Ella adored her big brother. To her, Paris was her hero, her protector, her whole world. The 3 of them were finally happy. But then how does a brother who seems to genuinely love his sister become her killer? The answer lies in something that happened 1 year before the murder. Something almost no one talks about. Something that should have been a warning. In 2006, when Paris and Ella were 12 and 3 years old, Charity relapsed. She had been clean for almost 12 years now, created a stable home for her children, and seemed to have everything under control. But addiction doesn't work that way. The stress of single motherhood, 2 failed relationships, financial pressures, and the weight of it all became too much. Charity turned back to her teenage habits, cocaine. At first, she thought she could hide it. She thought she could manage it, maintaining the facade of the loving mother she desperately wanted to be. But Paris knew. Children somehow always know. And something in him began to shift. The affectionate, gifted boy who had been his mother's pride and joy started to change. His grandmother, Ella Bennett, recalls how Ella's birth had already shifted Paris's outlook.
We knew, all of us knew, that there was something wrong with Paris. Charity knew, I knew.
From the time
Paris was an artistic kid from the very beginning. He used to draw his emotions. He began drawing again, not those innocent sketches of a creative child, but something darker, something disturbing.
It would bleed, or he had thrown glass all over the place. I guess he was screeching for help, but we just didn't pay any attention.
The signs started getting more dangerous. Sometimes, he would just pound his head against the wall until it bled, or had thrown glass all over the room. But still, his mother and grandmother thought he would be fine and change over time. His behavior also started to subtly change towards Ella. But then came the question that should have gave a final warning to Charity.
Mom, what's your least favorite word?
I don't know.
Kill Charity's children?
Paris.
Even this was not enough for Charity to realize that he needed help, that he might be suffering from a trauma. The incident that opened Charity's eyes was still yet to happen. 17th July, 2006. One day, Paris grabbed a kitchen knife and bolted out the door. When Charity and her mother finally tracked him down, Paris was waving the knife at Charity as if he wanted to kill her. His grandmother managed to grab the knife from behind, and Charity wrapped her arms around him. She recalled the incident. He just collapsed into this heap on the floor. We didn't know what was wrong with him. Paris, a 12-year-old kid, had threatened his mother. Finally, Charity made a decision that seemed reasonable at the time. She admitted Paris to Red River Hospital, a nearby psychiatric facility, hoping finally to get answers about what was happening to her son. She was desperate for help. Desperate for someone to tell her what was wrong with Paris. But from the moment Paris was admitted, something felt wrong. The doctors barely spoke to her. When she called for updates, she got vague responses. When she asked about his diagnosis, she was told they were still evaluating. Days passed, then a week. No clear answers, no treatment plan, no communication. Charity grew increasingly frustrated. These were supposed to be experts. They had her 12-year-old son, a boy who had just threatened his family with a knife, and they were telling her nothing. After just 1 week, Charity made a decision. If they weren't going to help, she would bring him home and figure it out herself. She had no idea that decision would cost Ella her life. Because what Charity didn't know was that the answers she'd been begging for already existed. They were written down, locked away in one file. A file she wouldn't see until more than a year later, after Ella was already gone. After his discharge, the family needed distance from the trauma. They moved across town to Abilene's west side. A fresh start, they hoped. One thing Paris said in an interview held me back during my research.
My grandmother's always been a very cold and collected woman. And I'm the same way.
Paris's psychopathy, his chilling detachment, his tendency toward violence. It wasn't something that suddenly appeared. It was inherited. It was in his genes because he wasn't the first murderer in his family. Long before him, another killer bore the family name. The one person Charity hated the most. Paris's grandmother, Ella Bennett. To understand Paris's darkness, we need to go back 27 years before he was born. But Six-year-old Charity was at school when her world fell apart. Someone murdered her father in their family home. James Robert Bennett Jr., also known as Bobby Bennett, was found in the foyer, shot multiple times in the chest, heart, and back of the head. Bobby Bennett wasn't just anyone. He came from a wealthy Atlanta family with a lucrative trucking business. When Bobby Bennett was murdered, someone stood to inherit everything. His wife, Ella Bennett. Here's something that made investigators immediately suspicious. Bobby and Ella Bennett had been separated. Their marriage was over. They were living apart. But then, just 57 hours before Bobby's murder, something strange happened. Less than 3 days later, Bobby Bennett was dead. And Kyla? She was now the sole heir to the family's lucrative trucking business and Bobby Bennett's estate. Prosecutors smelled a setup. Authorities charged Ella Bennett with hiring a hitman to murder her husband. The trial was sensational and widely covered. Prosecutors presented testimony that in the months before her husband's murder, Ella had given $50,000 for arranging her husband's killing with a part-time truck driver. The case seemed solid. The motive was clear. The timing was suspicious. But on July 9, 1980, after deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Not guilty. Ella Bennett walked free. She kept the business. She kept the money. She kept custody of 6-year-old Charity. And that little girl? She would now be raised by the woman most people, including Charity herself, believed murdered her father. Fast forward to 2017. 37 years after the trial. Ella Bennett agreed to be interviewed and said something disturbing about her husband's death.
I had to work to get my company back on its feet. I had to fight to keep my contracts with the government, and I had a child to raise, and I didn't have time to sit around and brood over spilt milk.
Wait, did she just refer to her husband's murder as spilled milk? Whew. She also said something that might just sound like a confession.
We all manipulate each other. We're all spoiled rotten. My other daughter, Caitlin, I don't think she's quite as good. She didn't have as good a teacher because I don't do it so much anymore. I don't have a company to manipulate. I don't have drivers to manipulate. And I don't have a jury to manipulate.
Ella joked about manipulating the jury. She casually joked about manipulating a murder trial, despite evidence of her guilt. Charity believes her mother was responsible for the murder of her father. Imagine being that child. Your father is murdered. Your mother is arrested, tried for his murder, and acquitted. But deep down, even as a child, you know the truth. You're being raised by the person who killed your dad. So as a teenager, Charity did something drastic. She started using drugs. Now you know why she had this teenage habit. It doesn't excuse her actions, but it does explain the pain that shaped her. Not because she wanted to get high, but because she wanted her mother to notice her, to care, to do something. Ella didn't care. She showed no interest. By the time Charity was 17, she was strung out on heroin. And what did her mother do? She kicked her daughter out, gave her $100 and told her she could either use it to find help or to score drugs and find a place to overdose. This is the woman who helped Charity raise Paris and Ella. When Charity moved back to Abilene in 2004, Ella Bennett was married 8 times. 8 different marriages. One of those husbands ended up dead, shot execution style. She was tried for his murder. What happened to the others? The information about them is widely not known. One thing the mother and daughter had in common: neither of them ever truly knew how to live within a marriage. Charity also. 2 brief marriages, both was just hardly a year in total. Patterns repeat. Trauma passes down. And Paris? He was watching, learning, absorbing it all. Let's trace what Paris inherited from his family. From his biological father, paranoid schizophrenia. A mind that saw things that weren't there. A genetic predisposition to mental illness. From his grandmother, Ella, psychopathy, coldness, and the ability to manipulate and lie. From his mother, trauma, addiction, instability. A boy with an IQ of 141. Genius-level intelligence combined with inherited darkness. By February 2007, Paris was 13 years old. 7 months had passed since the knife incident. 7 months since Red River Hospital. 7 months in their new home on the west side of Abilene. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Paris was back in school. Ella was happy. Charity was working long shifts at a restaurant, Buffalo Wild Wings, doing her best to keep things together. But that night changed their lives forever. February 4th, 2007. Super Bowl Sunday. Millions of Americans were gathered around televisions, eating wings, watching the game. For restaurants like Buffalo Wild Wings, Super Bowl Sunday is the busiest night of the year. Charity had to work late that night. Before leaving, she hired a babysitter for Paris and Ella, a 21-year-old college student who had watched the kids before. Everything seemed normal. Paris seemed fine. Ella was her usual energetic self. Charity kissed her kids goodbye and left for work, having no idea she would never see Ella alive again. For the next few hours, the babysitter watched the kids. Paris stayed in his room. Ella played with her toys. Paris spent hours online searching for and watching violent pornography, specifically S&M content and torture scenes. He also searched for snuff films. Around 10 p.m., the Super Bowl was still going. The babysitter was probably watching, distracted by the game. Paris came out of his room and somehow convinced her to leave. We don't know exactly what he said. Did he tell her Charity was coming home early? Did he say his grandmother was on her way? But whatever story Paris told, it worked. A 13-year-old boy successfully manipulated a 21-year-old adult into abandoning her babysitting job and leaving 2 children home alone. Remember, Paris is a genius. He knows how to lie convincingly. Now it was just Paris and Ella. For the next hour and a half, we didn't know exactly what Paris was doing. What we do know is that sometime before 11:30 p.m., Paris entered Ella's room and did something almost unbearable to describe. Paris assaulted his 4-year-old sister and stabbed her 17 times. And then Paris did something that reveals just how cold and calculated he really is. He didn't call 911. He didn't call his mother. He didn't panic. He called a friend from school. Yes, you heard that right. He talked to a friend for straight 6 minutes, maybe deciding what to do next. What story to make up before calling 911, or maybe just ran away from the house. What they talked about during those 6 minutes has never been revealed. Even the friend's name was kept out of all police records to protect the privacy of a minor. But one thing is clear. Paris wasn't in shock. He wasn't panicking. He was in complete control. And he wanted to share what he'd done with someone before calling authorities. After talking to his friend, Paris waited 4 minutes. Then he made his strategic call, the one that would complete his plan.
Abilene 911.
Hello?
Abilene 911, go ahead.
I accidentally killed somebody.
You think you killed somebody?
No, I know I did. I woke up and I was hallucinating.
You were hallucinating?
Yes, and I thought my sister was a demon and I killed her.
I want you to start CPR, okay? What I want you to do is take her off the bed.
No, I know for a fact that she's dead because
do you want to go ahead and try? It might still help, okay?
No, I don't think it'll help because...
Come on, Paris, work with me.
I know I stabbed her lots of times.
Okay. Paris?
Yes?
Take her off the bed and put her on the floor.
Okay, hold on. Please don't hang up.
I'm not hanging up on you.
I thought she was a demon.
Okay.
Okay, she's on the floor, but I can't stay here because she's all bloody and
Paris,
stuff.
what I want you to do is I want you to put your hands on her chest, okay? And I want you to push 30 times. I want you to count.
Okay.
All the way to 30, and then blow 2 breaths in her mouth, okay?
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Paris? We put it down.
Would you believe me if I told you that Paris faked those cries on the 911 call? He never even tried to give Ella CPR. When the dispatcher told him to move her to the floor to perform CPR, he never did that. When police arrived at the home, she was still lying on the bed, covered in blood, untouched. And that story he told about seeing his sister as a pumpkin-headed demon, that was a complete lie. His friend might have helped him come up with this hallucination story, And surprisingly, it worked. Everyone believed it. After all, his father had a history of severe mental illness, so it seemed possible that Paris was starting to see things too. Then, Charity got a call at her office.
They told me that my daughter had been hurt. And I was like, you need to take me to Ella now. And they were like, you can't go. And I'm like, what do you mean I can't go? You just told me that she's hurt. She needs her mother. And then they said, well, she's dead.
For any parent, this would be nothing short of a nightmare. Charity really, really loved Ella. She was completely shattered.
4-year-old Ella Bennett was fatally stabbed. Taken into custody was her 13-year-old brother.
Paris Bennett convinced his babysitter to go home early while their mom was gone. He stabbed Ella 17 times.
And then came the most devastating moment of all. The discovery of Ella's body.
She was in a body bag, of course. It was zipped up to her chin. She had blood coming out of her mouth.
Charity did not know that his own son murdered her beautiful daughter and confessed it to police.
How old is Ella?
4.
She's 4 years old. How old are you?
13.
Is she bleeding anywhere?
Yeah, she's bleeding all over the bed. Because I stabbed her.
What did you stab her with?
A knife.
Okay, where'd you stab her?
Lots of places.
Soon after, Paris was taken into custody for further investigation. In the interrogation room the next morning, detectives asked Paris the question everyone wanted answers for. Why? Why did you kill your sister? Long. And Paris gave an answer that would haunt everyone who heard it. I wanted to hurt my mother. I wanted to make her suffer. And killing Ella was the best way to do that. He explained that he had been planning this for months. He resented Charity for her drug relapse. He blamed her for the chaos in their lives. He loved Ella, but at the same time was angry that she took all the love and attention that once belonged to him. He told detectives, I wanted to kill her first, but she wouldn't have felt the pain I felt growing up in that house. I was living with a drug addict and she never helped me. I wanted my mother to suffer. Now she won't have any of her kids. Ella is gone, and I'll be punished, so she'll have to live alone. Paris Lee Bennett was arrested and charged with capital murder. Because Paris was only 13 years old, just 1 year young to be tried as an adult under Texas law, he was prosecuted in juvenile court. He was found guilty and sentenced to 40 years in prison. But what most people don't know is that he's eligible for parole after serving just half that time. Paris has already spent 18 years behind bars, which means that in February 2027, approximately a year from now, Paris Lee Bennett, a diagnosed psychopath who murdered his 4-year-old sister to emotionally destroy his mother, could walk free. In every interview he's given from prison, Paris has shown zero remorse for murdering Ella. He's told reporters and psychologists that he enjoys watching his mother's pain. In 2019, British journalist Piers Morgan interviewed Paris. He was calm, articulate, even charming. He smiled. He joked about her own sister's death. Morgan later said it was one of the most disturbing interviews he'd ever conducted. Not because Paris seemed crazy, but because he seemed so completely sane and utterly devoid of empathy. Multiple psychological evaluations have diagnosed Paris as a psychopath with no capacity for genuine remorse. But before this story ends, there's one final piece you need to know that could have saved Ella. After Ella's murder, the Red River Hospital file from July 2006, the one Charity had begged to see but was denied, was finally released. Inside that file were all the answers she had been searching for. Doctors had diagnosed Paris with conduct disorder with callous unemotional traits, a condition often seen as an early sign of psychopathy. They documented his lack of empathy, his manipulative behavior, and his disturbing fascination with violence. And at the very end of the report, they had written one line: separation from younger siblings advised. They knew Paris was dangerous to Ella, and they never told Charity. 7 months later, Ella was dead. Paris held the knife. But many believe others equally share the blame. A mother overwhelmed by addiction, a grandmother who raised dysfunction, a babysitter who left without confirming with the parent, and a hospital that had the answers but kept them locked away until it was too late. Everyone was equally responsible.
Kiss your sister. Ella loves her big brother and his toys.
This is Ella Bennett. She was only 4 years old, a little girl who loved her brother more than anything, who believed he was her hero. She never knew that the person she trusted most would become the reason her story ended. But in the end, Cy's justice was served. Her killer was caught, convicted, and will spend decades behind bars. And today, Ella's story stands as a reminder that even the smallest voice can echo louder than the darkness that tried to silence it.